This is a hollow body electric guitar. It marked the first big breakthrough in trying to amplify the sound of a guitar, in an era where music became louder and louder. Us guitarists needed some help. We didn't practice all these skills for nothing. Enter the guitar pickup. It stood at the cradle of a major revolution in music and in the guitar industry itself. The solid or semi-solid body electric guitar. What's so amazing to realize is that almost all guitars currently on the market are either a direct descendant or very similar to just a handful of instruments that came to life during the span of just one decade, the 50s. My name is Paul David, and in this video we'll go over the characteristics and sounds of the most iconic guitar types and brands. And seeing all the instruments in the context of their time and why they came to be is super interesting to see. And this story starts in 1950. The Fender Telecaster was the first successful solid body electric guitar that came on the market. Although that wasn't quite the name Leo Fender had in mind. It started as the Broadcaster. Turns out Gretsch, a company we'll see later in this video, didn't like that. They had a drum set with that same name and kindly asked Leo to change the name of the Broadcaster. So 1 year later, in '51, he did. And it became known as the Telecaster. Over 70 years later, and the design is still pretty much unchanged and still massively popular among all types of guitarists. This guitar can do it all. The power is in the simplicity. 2 single coil pickups, a 3-way pickup switch, volume and a tone, giving you that bright open sound. So this is the sound where the Telecaster is most known for, the twang from that bridge pickup. And this is the lovely round and creamy neck pickup. So the most forward position on this guitar features the mythical dark circuit to emulate a bass. So you can't use both the neck and the bridge at the same time, but luckily all Tellys from '67 and onwards actually have a useful pickup switch to engage both. So on this guitar, I can show you how this sounds. This is a thin line Telecaster, first introduced in '68, and it delivers a slightly warmer and darker tone as opposed to the solid body counterpart. This is how it sounds with both pickups. After the huge success Fender had with the Telecaster, Gibson desperately needed a response to that. And they had. Gibson answered with the Les Paul in 1952. Just like the Tele, it's a single cut design. There's one cutaway near the upper frets of the neck. But other than that, the Les Paul is a different beast in almost all aspects. For 5 years, the guitar was built exclusively with a gold finish, the gold top, featuring P90 pickups, Gibson's version of the single coils. Now, I don't have an original early Gibson Les Paul here, but this is a custom build that comes somewhat close to the looks and the sounds of one. During the first years they kept upgrading the model. In '55 they replaced the wraparound bridge with a 2-pneumatic bridge, making intonation on the neck so much better. In '57 they introduced the iconic humbucker pickup, the PAF, patent applied for, and a year later they added the sunburst finish. This resulted into the creation of easily the most valuable guitars to date. Between '58 and '60 Gibson would produce the Gibson Les Paul Standard Burst. The guitar was considered a commercial failure, and that's why the production came to a halt in 1960. So the rarity in combination with that many consider this being the greatest Les Paul ever built means that an original from that era will set you back a few $100,000. So it's obvious that this is a '59 reissue Les Paul. And just for fun, because they are so different, let's compare the sound of a Les Paul to that of a Tele. difference in sound is quite obvious, but there's more difference that's worth noting, like the necks. This is a glued neck versus a bolt-on neck. Lightweight versus moderately heavy. Longer scale length, so the strings are longer, so it's more difficult to bend, for example, versus a shorter scale length, which also means shorter frets, making it a little bit finicky higher up the neck. The radius of the fretboard is different, and then there's the obvious control difference, 4 knobs, 2 knobs, etc. So all these variables make these two totally different guitars. And these two ways of building guitars would set the benchmark for many more guitars to come. For example, remember that company that I politely asked Leo Fender to take the name off the broadcaster? Fred Gretsch was looking at what the competition was doing. At first being very skeptical of that modern nonsense, but when seeing the success of it, they released their take on the Les Paul in 1953. The Gretsch Duojet. At first, 2 single coils, and what many seem to forget about, the hollowed out body. This made the guitar so much lighter and gave it its unique sound. The Melita Synchrosonic bridge was a revolutionary adjustable system, predating the Gibson 2-pneumatic bridges, increasing the intonation of the instrument. So these pickups are modeled after the first single coils they used, the Dynasonic, fat and bright. Then in '57, the same year Gibson introduced their famous PAF pickups, Gretsch would introduce their iconic humbucking pickups that are still in high demand as of today, the Filtertrons. So they are not installed on this guitar, but almost at the end of this video you can still hear them on another one. So this model has a Bigsby vibrato installed, invented by Paul Bigsby in the early 50s, and soon Gibson and Gretsch guitars offered it on their guitars, and you could even buy it as an aftermarket option for the Telecaster. And maybe Gretsch never reached the same popularity as Fender and Gibson, but many notable players loved theirs. Chet Atkins, George Harrison, Malcolm Young, Neil Young, Pete Townsend. I guess you can say that the sound of their instruments shaped a great deal of the music history as we know it today. But meanwhile, something magical was happening in that West Coast company we all know. Besides all the amps he designed, Leo Fender was still thinking about how he could improve on that Telecaster. And so it happened. In 1954, 4 years after the birth of the Telecaster, they released probably the most successful and iconic guitar ever, the Fender Stratocaster. The biggest upgrades were a third single coil pickup in the middle, giving you more tonal flexibility, the comfortable contour body shape that was easier to hold and play, and the added, although incorrectly named, a tremolo system to the guitar. Yeah, pretty much the same thing Paul Bigsby developed a few years back. So I'm sure we all know how a Strat sounds, but yeah, here's the neck pickup. And the often overlooked middle pickup. And the bridge pickup. Up to the 70s, all Fender Strats shipped with a 3-way pickup switch. 1, 2, 3. And people would try to find these iconic in-between settings where you sort of jam it in the middle of a setting, trying to find a combination of the neck and the middle, or the bridge and the middle. Let's see. There we are. You see? So luckily all the guitars now ship with 5-way switches, making life so much more easier. So the following years we saw mostly incremental improvements on the known designs. That was until 1958, where 4 new models saw the light of day. And that started with the first semi-hollow or semi-solid or thin-line guitar that came on the market. Before the Les Paul, all Gibsons were completely hollow, like this ES225. But with performances getting louder and louder, these guitars were very prone to feedbacking. Kind of annoying, right? And that's where the 300 series came in. Starting with the Gibson Es 335 in 1958. And although they were still mostly hollow, there's the usual F-holes with the arched laminated maple top. Now there was a solid piece of wood running through the center of the guitar, the center block. This increased sustain made it brighter sounding and got rid of that unwanted feedback. And of course, it featured the 1 year earlier invented humbucker pickup. All these ingredients put together create one of the greatest tones around. The 335 is a special beast, so the reach on the neck, especially compared to these older hollow bodies, was unparalleled. And to many, this is the most versatile guitar Gibson ever made. So many jazz and blues players favor the guitar, obviously. I mean, it's seen in hands like B.B. King or Larry Carlton. But the guitar also put its mark on the rock and roll and even the hard rock scene. So there's very little you can't do with the ES 335. And in that same year, Gibson released two more iconic models. But let's first head over to what Fender came with. Where the Gibson 335 was aimed at a jazz player, so was the Fender Jazzmaster that debuted in 1958. Meant to be the most luxurious guitar of the Fender lineup, but the jazzers weren't really interested in this new kid on the block and mostly stuck with these archtop hollow-bodied guitars. Soon though, the model was adopted by the surf rockers, a massively popular genre emerging in the early 60s. Nowadays the model is regaining popularity amongst the indie scene, where we see it in the hands of many young and upcoming artists. These bodies were carved to be more balanced on the lap when sitting down due to that offset guitar body shape. And this was the first Fender with a rosewood fingerboard instead of maple. Although the pickups look very similar to the Gibson P90, they work quite differently. They have a wider and deeper tone, without losing the clarity we all know and love from the traditional Fender pickups. So the newly designed tremolo system was meant to suit the more subtle approach, and although it had quite some issues in the beginning, it did give the guitar a unique voicing with characteristic overtones. All that, paired with a unique set of controls to shape the tone, make this instrument an easy guitar to love. Those same controls and tremolo systems were fitted on the Fender Jaguar too. That came to life 4 years later in 1962, and I'm putting the Jag under the same umbrella since the Jaguar was meant to be an upgraded Jazzmaster, and visually they are pretty similar. The most obvious changes were new pickups, a shorter scale length, even shorter than the one Gibson was using, and it was the first Fender with 22 frets instead of the traditional 21. This model became much appreciated in the 90s with the birth of the grunge scene. So the year was 58, but we saw the Jazzmaster, the ES 335, and we're not done yet, because in that very year Gibson debuted the Explorer and the Flying V. In an attempt to modernize the company, Gibson went back to the drawing board. Sales of solid bodies were going down. They needed something new and spicy, so they designed three eye-catching models: the unreleased Modern, the Explorer, and lastly, Flying V. Designed with that retro aesthetic look that was so popular in that era, and it was their attempt to prove that Gibson wasn't what Leo Fender claimed it to be, a stodgy old company that never had an original idea in their lives. The first V had a 2-pneumatic bridge, 2 humbuckers, and a 3-knob volume and tone control, and a wing-shaped tailpiece. In 2 years, Gibson would produce less than 100 Vs and even less Explorers. Sales came to a halt and they stopped production of both models in '59. A bit too ambitious for the time, I guess, but in the late 60s production started again when notable players like Albert King and Jimi Hendrix picked up the instrument. This guitar is modeled after the custom Jimi Hendrix guitar from 1969 and it features the Gibson Vibrola, Gibson's take on the Bixby and Fender tremolo systems. So Gibson was in bad weather. Sales went down across the board and they cancelled the Les Paul, the V and the Explorer in 1960 to make place for a new kid on the block. Well, new kid? Kind of. In '61, Gibson introduced the Gibson Solid Guitar, the Gibson SG. The Les Paul needs a drastic change is what they thought. The double cut, creating a faster and more accessible neck. They made the body thinner and lighter, following the contours of the human body, making it easier to play, and so much little tweaks. Also, they call it the most balanced guitar they ever produced. So the first SGs were still marketed as Les Paul standards, but Les Paul, the guitarist that lends its name to the original model, wasn't too happy with the redesign of his guitar and wanted his name off the Les Paul 2.0. And so it happened. The birth of the Gibson SG. In terms of tone, it does exactly what you think. So the sound of an SG is not as overwhelming and thick as a Les Paul. It's a bit more open and bright. That in combination with that mega reach on the neck and the guitar being very light makes this guitar super versatile and it's seen across many genres. So far all the guitars and types and shapes we saw can be seen as traditional. They were developed over 60 years ago and still determine how a big chunk of the guitars sold today look, sound and play. But in the 80s something changed. A new genre of music started to erupt and guitarists were looking for a guitar better suited for that style. Enter the Super Strat, the guitar that became the face of metal and hard rock. Companies pioneering this new philosophy are brands like Ibanez, Jackson, Charvel and Kramer. High output pickups to crank the amp even more, resulting into more distorted sound. A flatter fretboard radius and the new extreme tremolo system, combined with the superb playability and even better reach on the neck, often seen with up to 24 frets, while still following general design philosophy of the Stratocaster, making this a versatile rock and metal monster. Probably the most iconic guitar of this family has to be the Ibanez Jam, designed for and with guitar virtuoso Steve Vai. But this is the Ibanez RG Super Strat. Actually, the first guitar I ever bought, and maybe not as high-end as the rest of the guitars in this video. Nonetheless, an absolute fine guitar. Now, there's many more brands that could be included. Dan Electro, Yamaha, Rickenbacker, Epiphone, Music Man, there's many. But I feel like I've got to include one more brand. In a very traditional, often conservative guitar market, it's hard to start a new business and turn into one of the established names. But Paul Reed Smith, the founder of PRS Guitars, did just that. In 1985 he opened a factory and along the way pushed many innovations to the table. Often PRS showcases extravagant designs with stunning visual elements. Many guitarists lean towards the more modern design philosophy of the PRS guitars, most notable being John Mayer, who shook the guitar world when they released the PRS Silver Sky, a modern take on the vintage Strat. Anyway, here's some classic tones that I associate with that PRS sound. And if you want to know more about this guitar in particular, maybe check out the video I made. Maybe the best solo I ever played. Lastly, I like to talk about boutique guitars. Smaller companies or individuals putting their life's work into making the best guitar they can possibly make. Often putting a lot of hours into making just one instrument. That can be highly inspired by the traditional shapes we've seen, often called the S style or the T style, Strat or Teles. Or it can be a totally new vision with fresh and unfamiliar designs. For example, this Novo Ceres T. Obviously a T-style guitar, we've got the two Gretsch Filtertron inspired pickups we talked about earlier, and of course the Telecaster style bridge and controls. But definitely a unique identity going on. And here is the B&G little sister. I mean, that's a whole unique sound going on. The thin line, single cut inspired guitar, yeah, with P90s. And a slotted headstock, for example. It's a very cool, unique feature set. If you've been paying attention, you realize that I didn't specifically talk about genres too much. So I think this story has proven that when a guitar is built with a particular genre in mind, it often finds its way into new realms that the maker didn't even think about in the first place. Also, please don't limit yourself to the brands I mentioned or the models I talked about in this video. This is an overview where it all started, and nowadays there are so many great guitars, and if you can't imagine it, there's probably someone who can build it for you, which is a great thing. So if after watching all these beautiful guitars you feel inspired, I think you would love going through my intermediate guitar course, Next Level Playing. It's a carefully designed roadmap to help people reach that next level of playing. All the things I advise people to learn and how to do it, bundled with tabs, backing tracks and detailed explainer videos in a 7-level course going through the many facets of what a guitar means to me and making you a great all-round guitarist, from solos to rhythm guitar and from exercises to improvisation. I use my experience as a teacher and combine everything in a fun and easy to follow step-by-step roadmap. Check it out at nextlevelplaying.com. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to gently hit that thumbs up. Thank you so much, it means a lot. Drop a comment below, and of course, if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. Thanks everyone for helping me out with this video, for the guitars and stuff, and I hope to see you around next time. Cheers!